Good afternoon and greetings. My name is Doc West. I never thought I would be in front of our city talking. I'm an educator and like to be in schools educating our young people. But I do want to say thank God for this opportunity and thank our mayor for wanting to put a stop to the gun violence in our city. I'm from Columbus, born and raised in the streets and roads of Columbus. Love this city, see how it's growing. But to have our young people, and these are my students. I've been in the schools for 24 years, so over 4,000 students that you come across. And even when I asked my teacher, what are the highs and lows of our profession? And she said, when you see them do great things, as we see so many of our students from Columbus, the city of Columbus do, but also that down moment when you get a phone call at 2 a.m. and there's been gun violence and you know the young person. Just this summer, I've had two students, very young, 14 and 15-year-old, murdered to the gun violence. So definitely we need to get the guns off the streets. I mean, wow, how does a child get a gun is my question. But we know that they're in our homes. Our young people have so much promise and potential, and it's being cut short. How many lives are affected by gun violence? We have to talk to our youth. Everyone has to talk to our youth. Aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, pastors. Everyone has to talk to our young people and really know where they are, know where their friends are. And really, as I talk about friends, a lot of times the police can't be everywhere. Family can't be everywhere. Our parents can't be everywhere. And each one of those are doing their jobs. But then our friends are typically always around us. So always when I'm talking to young people, I'm asking them, do you have friends that know how to talk you off that ledge? Say no, don't shoot. Let's talk it out. Also what I see in schools and working with our youth is conflict resolution. There definitely has to be programs and even more, and I work with that a lot within our schools, just because I see the little small issues turning into a big argument, then a fight. These things happen when our young people graduate. Now they're 18 to 24, and they're kind of, oh, I'm out of school, I'm free, I'm grown. So we really have to target and have programs and funneling for that population. And we really even have to get it even before then, because by the time 18, 19, they're on a stronger path. We just really have to have that. I care about our young people. I don't want to attend any more funerals. So please lock up guns. Talk to our young people about getting off the streets. We don't talk about a curfew, but that can be part of it. And honestly, I can say, and it wasn't part of my speaking this morning, I was kind of okay with a curfew at 6 and 7 o'clock. It seemed like to me, as I'm tracking our city, that the crime was down. So I love our young people. I just thank you for this opportunity for our mayor. Our mayor is going to come up next, and thank you, Mayor, for putting this on. So I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal West, and thank you for all that you do with young people and with families in this community. We're grateful for your service, and I want to recognize your heartache and loss of losing young people that have been victims of gun violence this summer. I want to thank Chief Quinlan, Columbus Public Health, our Department of Neighborhoods, Recreation and Parks, Department of Development, Commissioner Boyce, President Nana Watson, Pastor Tatum. I also want to recognize Pastor Eddie Parker of Word Church that has joined us here today, Elder Larry Price, as well as our Senator Herschel Craig. 3, 12, 13, 14, 64. Those are the ages of some of the recent victims of gun violence. 84, 766. Those are the number of homicides and felonious assaults to date. But neighbors, I'm not here to talk to you about numbers. I'm here to talk to you about people, loved ones, neighbors being caught up in tragic, senseless violence. These are brothers and sisters, moms and dads, cousins, nieces, nephews, never walking in that door again, never filling their seats at holiday dinners again, and in so many cases, never having the chance to grow up and reach their full potential. To those in the media, I know many of you want to compare this year to 2017, when we had the highest number of homicides recorded in a single year. In response to that year, we launched the Comprehensive Neighborhood Safety Strategy, a multi-pronged approach that reflects our shared values, that every resident in every neighborhood deserves to be safe. To achieve these goals, we started new initiatives to address crime differently, holistically, while continuing with our proven safety strategies. And it worked. We saw significant decreases in homicides in both 2018 and 2019, when we saw a 23% drop and a 31% drop, respectively. But this year is very different for many different reasons. A global pandemic, no in-person school, fewer opportunities for extracurricular activities, and very little in the way of summer youth employment, since so many employers are working remotely. Obviously, this cry for racial justice and movement for reform is different too. Columbus is not alone in this spike of violence. When you look at major cities across the country and mid-sized cities like Columbus, they're all experiencing many of the same things. Charlotte had 22 homicides in 1 month. Indianapolis's homicides are up 50%. Austin, 64%. And even closer to home, Cincinnati is up 55%, and Cleveland is up 60%. We're not responsible for what is happening on a national level, but we are responsible for what is happening in Columbus. And we know we cannot police our way out of everything that has happened and the spike of violence we're seeing today. But because of the collaborative framework we put in place with the Comprehensive Neighborhood Safety Strategy, we are able to take a broad-based, holistic approach to what we're experiencing as a community. In a few moments, you'll hear from some of our partners on their contributions to this critically important work. I'd like to announce some of the steps we are taking. We're forming micro-intervention teams to go to the homes of at-risk youth and offer services or consequences. This is going to be a collaborative approach between police and others, a police officer, a social worker, juvenile courts. We're going to offer wraparound services, employment through the APPS program, paid jobs working on beautification projects at community centers and other city-owned property, with mentoring from APPS graduates. Offer additional services for the whole family through the county's Family Stabilization Unit that Commissioner Boyce will talk more about here in a moment. In the fall, we'll look at expanding these teams to each of our target neighborhoods through the CARE Coalition to reach out block by block in the areas where these shootings have occurred. But our micro-interventions are happening right now with investigations into who can be best served. We're going to renew and expand ShotSpotter, which has been an incredibly effective tool for our law enforcement officers. We're going to expand it to the Near East Side and expand our already committed effort in Linden, the South Side, and the Hilltop. We're moving forward with our partnership with Grant Hospital, Columbus Public Health and Recreation and Parks called Boyce, Violence Outreach, Intervention, Community Engagement. So that's aimed at providing bedside intervention to victims of assault, not domestic violence, and gunshot wounds to help them create opportunities for change. Finally, we will be earmarking up to $2 million in CARES Act funding. And so it's fitting that Congresswoman Beatty's office is represented here today. We wouldn't be able to do this work without her leadership and commitment. This $2 million funding effort will go to partner with social service agencies and trusted community partners embedded in our neighborhoods to reach out to our youth directly. Folks with street cred that are going to take some innovative approaches to disrupt and help take young people out of this path of destruction and violence. They'll be leveraging existing relationships and position of trust to provide intervention services and support systems. CARES Act dollars are being used to offset the impact of COVID-19, and we know that our at-risk youth have been significantly impacted by school closures and lack of positive engagement and opportunities for employment. I would now like to invite Police Chief Tom Quinlan to the podium to share a little bit more information about ShotSpotter and the work that Columbus Police will be doing. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor Ginther. Good afternoon. Less than 1 month ago, on July 13th, we gathered in Linden to speak out against the violence in our community and spoke about the fact too often the victims are teenagers and young adults. We shared a troubling fact that there had been 67 homicides and the fact that aggravated assaults were up 125%. Today, we share more troubling news as our community continues to be disheartened by the fact deaths have now risen to 84 homicides and many, many more aggravated assaults, over 700. Any one of these aggravated assaults could have resulted in a homicide, but for the rapid life-saving measures used by Columbus fire medics and our local hospitals. There have been 384 instances of bullets striking homes, often finding more than 30 bullet holes of multiple calibers. And officers have responded to more than 2,800 calls of shots fired. The impact on our community strains our ability for comprehension. The question remains, can we as a community rise above the surge of violence and together implement meaningful strategies to reduce this menace that is unfairly defining us and placing the future of our young people in jeopardy? I believe we can make a difference, but only if we work together, if each of us fulfill our responsibility to the community. We have heard loudly the demand to hold police accountable. It is my hope there is equal demand for accountability with all partners in the criminal justice system. Only when all partners work toward our shared responsibility of addressing these criminal activities that are driving the violence, we will realize a decline in deaths. While there are many partners who have their own duty to perform in remedying this escalating violence, I am here to outline the police response. When we look at crime patterns, we focus on three aspects: people, places, and behaviors. This summer, we have seen a significant increase in violent crime from a small group of individuals, many of which are juveniles, that have been repeatedly committing shootings, robberies, car thefts, and burglaries. Excuse me. Many have committed these crimes while wearing electronic monitoring devices, and many are inspired to act by adults who provide guns to commit these crimes. Adults and juveniles alike know if caught, a juvenile will face little consequence, but an adult might. As many of the suspects are juveniles, we build our plan as a focused deterrence model where we will identify individuals through offense reports and with input from patrol officers who serve these areas daily and know who is responsible in many cases. We will conduct interventions with a prosecutor and many other community partners. In addition, we will have a team working to solve current cases and conduct investigations into weapons law violations and continue bringing offenders before the court. We will expand our utilization of ShotSpotter to focus in on the specific blocks of the city that are being traumatized through this continual barrage of gunfire. This plan sounds punitive focused, so let's be clear. I support police-initiated diversion programs for youth. I support summons in lieu of arrest practices for nonviolent misdemeanors. I support resources that can be offered to our youth through the Juvenile Courts Reception Center program. But what I will not support is when young people, whether an adult or juvenile, have been charged with violent crimes involving the use of or possession of firearms and continue to be released without consequences, who are undoubtedly placing our community in danger. Our plan of action includes many approaches. Our plan includes investigators from many areas of the division working collaboratively to identify groups driving this dangerous criminal activity. Units like our gang investigators, gun crimes detectives, our crime lab, our major crimes units, along with patrol officers. Additional collaborations are in place with partner agencies like ATF, CARE Coalition, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and many other to pursue criminals driving the spike of violence in Columbus. We will utilize our Public Information Office to educate the public on methods to properly store guns and limit access to guns in homes and vehicles, report when guns are stolen, create public safety announcements using our social media platforms to keep the public informed and engaged in solutions. We have designated phone numbers, email addresses, and mobile app tools. We encourage people with tips to call by phone Crime Stoppers at 614-461-8477 or TIPS. You can email us at guncrimes@columbuspolice.org. You can download the Columbus Police mobile app for your phone. Click on Submit a Tip and select the homicide icon to share with police information about a prohibited person with a gun or when you fear a gun might be used in an attack. We are adding an icon in the next few weeks that will specifically focus on reporting tips of illegal gun possession or reporting where to locate an individual with a gun who might be planning to use it against another person or even drive by and fire into a home. We need your tips to prevent future violence. We will be implementing evidence-based policing strategies to focus on small numbers of offenders who are responsible for most of the gun violence and vigorously investigate non-fatal shootings in areas seeing peaks of violence by using directed patrols, concentrating police in known hotspots for gun crimes, interventions with high-risk individuals, and using predictive analytics, as well as knocking on doors of persons considered high risk, such as those wearing electronic monitoring devices. We will more fully utilize ballistic technology, shortening the turnaround time for processing evidence linked to gun crimes. We will dedicate more staffing to achieve our goals by commanders working across bureaus to guide our efforts. Gang unit members will be assigned full-time to focus on issues that they are uniquely positioned to address. Support officers from patrol will be utilized. Investigators will prioritize crimes based on people, places, and behaviors that are contributing to this violence. Juvenile prosecutors will be engaged to track cases through the system. An intel analyst will help drive the who, where, and when so patrol can capitalize on proactive time. A multi-layered approach working in collaborations will be utilized to stem this violence. Success depends on all of us working together. If we succeed, lives will be saved. What work can we perform together that could possibly be more important? Thank you. And now it's my privilege to introduce Franklin County Commissioner Kevin Boyce.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Boyce, Franklin County Commissioner. On behalf of my colleagues, Marilyn Brown and John O'Grady, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mayor Ginther, Doc West, Chief Quinlan, Nana Watson from the NAACP for all that you do to strengthen our community. But 2020 has been the year of all years. We started the year with a global pandemic that led to a shutdown, not just here, but nationally and across the globe. And then there was the tragedy and the death of George Floyd. The unrest that followed shook our nation, but more importantly, it woke our nation up from the long slumber that 2020 has put us in. And the statistics that you've heard today and the challenges that we face are but of one aspect of this presentation today. The more important aspect is how we respond. At Franklin County, we're thinking very deeply about the impact of COVID-19 and all of the layers and challenges that it has presented. Before the global pandemic, there was another pandemic, the pandemic of poverty, pandemic of racism, and all of the systemic ailments that come with those two issues. And so we peeled back the layers to begin to think about how Franklin County can approach our job differently so that we can come out of this stronger than when we entered. And so it's my pleasure today, standing here with Mayor Ginther and Nana Watson from the NAACP, and certainly Chief Quinlan and Doc West, you're on the front line, my friend. But as partners in announcing the establishment of the Family Stabilization Unit, which is a pilot program that will work across local government agencies to help our families successfully navigate the challenge of a complex and all too often challenged environment that they live in. It's the first of its kind unit. Sorry, I'm reading this from my phone, so I'm getting all these texts that keep getting in my way here. But it's the first of its kind unit that will provide wraparound assistance while taking a tailored approach to meet the unique needs of each family, all through social determinants of health and racial equity lenses. And this is important because it allows us to think uniquely about that family and its challenges. No different than each of us look to one another. That's how families exist in our world. And so the idea that a cookie cutter approach can help one family to the next is not the right approach. And so what we're saying with this Family Stabilization Unit is let's peel back the layers, dig deep to find out where their challenges are, but most importantly, provide the resources to help these families be successful. While the unit will initially serve boys and young men of color, at least focus on that, involved in the justice system, and who have had lower level offenses such as truancy and minor delinquency, we'll be working to address all of the families that come through our juvenile system. And it's so important that, as I talked about, the local government agencies working together. The unit won't be there to just observe the disparate issues, but focus on outcomes through this equity lens designed to meet the needs of not just the community, or not just the family, but also the community. Instead of focusing solely on preventing boys from the future of interactions with the justice system, we'll assess the needs to ensure that the entire household, a holistic approach, and a multi-generational approach to ensure that the family gets all of the resources they need, be it food, rent assistance, transportation, employment, all of the things that help families, most importantly, be successful, but more importantly, thrive. The unit is collaborating with the courts, primarily through the Juvenile Courts Truancy Intervention and Prevention Program, Board of Commissioner agencies like the Office of Aging and Child Support Enforcement, as well as levy funding social service agencies such as Children's Services and ADAM-H, or the Alcohol, Drug, Mental Health, and Addiction Services Board, to create an integrated approach to addressing the family needs. The unit also plans to incorporate a workforce development component for families that are unemployed or underemployed through partnerships with Columbus State Community College. The unit is expected to be up and running here shortly, and we're just getting started. But more importantly, we see it as a pilot program that can be replicated to be all-inclusive of the many challenges that families face in Central Ohio. And so, again, the statistics you hear are alarming, but what I'm hopeful about is the work that comes thereafter to support and address the needs of each and every family that lives in Central Ohio. In order to do that, it requires partners and partnerships with agencies and organizations like the NAACP right here in Central Ohio. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Nana Watson, who's the president of our local chapter of the NAACP. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyce. Good afternoon. Nana Watson, your NAACP. There are 330 million people in the United States. There are 360 million guns in the United States. We are here today because we are fighting to win this battle against guns and gun violence in our community, and we are depending on you to help. The question is, will you join the fight with us? Because when the Columbus community unites and when we fight together, we win. Last week, the Columbus branch of the NAACP convened a meeting with Franklin County juvenile judges, elected officials, and other stakeholders in our community. We gathered to have a transparent, no-holds-barred meeting with the goal of stopping gun violence. We will continue that dialogue next month. The NAACP has also developed a social media campaign entitled Take Over Tuesday, which is focused on getting a message out to our Black children about gun violence via various social media platforms. I ask you to please assist us in getting the guns out of our community. Mayor Ginther, we join you, county commissioners, and anyone and any other organization who is willing to fight against these senseless acts of violence. If we fight together as a community, we will stop the violence, save lives, and make all of Columbus and Franklin County safe. Thank you. Mayor.
Thank you, Nana, for your leadership and partnership in this important work. So we've laid out a collaborative approach to curb the violence in our neighborhoods. It is just the start. And as our community continues to grow and change, so will these efforts. I want to emphasize, and I believe all of our speakers here today would agree, that this spike in youth violence is not a police problem. It's not a public health problem. It's not a neighborhood problem. The problem belongs to all of us, and we all have a role to play in that solution, which is why it's fitting to have a perspective from the faith community to close us out here today. I'd like to invite Pastor Charles Tatum to share perspectives from the faith community and close us in prayer. Pastor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Reverend Charles Tatum, pastor of the Good Shepherd Baptist Church and also the chairman of the Concerned Linden Clergy Group. As I prepare to close us out with a word of prayer, I do have some remarks. I want to address this to my brother because he left out a segment of our society that have their feet on the ground. I remember a few years ago, my pastor, Dr. Keith A. Troy, was once asked the question, where are all the pastors? Where are all the preachers in the midst of this? And Dr. Troy looked them straight in the eye and he said, we're where we've always been. We're down in the ditches. We're down there working, but we don't see NBC, ABC, and CBS coming down in the ditch to film us there. I want our mayor to know, I want our commissioner to know, I want our police chief to know that all pastors, especially I know in the Linden area, we are there to work and to be of service, not only to our churches, but to our communities and to all the other segments of society. We are there because we love people and we care about their welfare. So whatever it is, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Commissioner, Nana, that you need for us to do, Police Chief, that you need for us to do in order to curb this epidemic, and I call it a pandemic because it's really, as far as I'm concerned, a pandemic of epidemic proportion. Whatever it is that you need us to do, we want you to know that we are willing to roll up our sleeves a little bit higher, dig a little bit deeper, and get down there in the ditch to do whatever is needed so that we can save our babies' lives and save our citizens' lives. So with that being said, I would like to close us out with a word of prayer. For those of you who believe in prayer, if you would be so kind as to bow your heads. I want to begin with the familiar words of Sir Isaac Watts. He once put pen to paper and wrote, "O God, our help of ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. God, this day, this hour, this moment, we are coming to you. Our city, our state, and our nation stands in need of a divine panacea. Pandemics are running rampant in the land. COVID is killing. Hatred and racism are stealing. And guns and bullets are decimating homes, communities, and robbing our children of life. Oh God, we have tried and continue to try to do all that is humanly possible. But in so many ways, we have come short of the needed solutions. So now, Creator and Sustainer of all, we come in deep humility to you. We need you. We want you. Our only hope is in you. So, Father of all, help us at this hour to solemnly and sincerely fulfill the requirement and receive the blessing as that recorded in 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. So God, help us to humble ourselves. Help us to fervently seek your face in prayer. Help our city, our state, our nation to turn from our wicked ways so that we can hear from you, be forgiven by you, and receive healing in this land from you. Let it begin with your church. Flow down like mighty streams to our mayor, our governor, and even the White House, the Congress, and the Senate. Then justice will roll down like water, and righteousness flow like a mighty stream. For this is your servant's prayer. This is a prayer from our city, our leaders, and we ask it in the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ, and all who are willing can say, amen.
Thank you, Pastor, for that perspective and all that you're doing in Linden and in neighborhoods around the city. Be happy to take questions from the press at this time, and if our speakers can hang around in case they want to ask any questions to you, that'd be great. Yes, sir.
Some of the shootings of the juveniles occurred in the early mornings, and there's a curfew out there. Any plans to stricter enforce the curfew to prevent any of these kids being out bad during those hours during the day?
You know, it's something that we are very concerned about. As we talked about how this is different from years past. I mean, you take a look at the average age of victims has dropped from 37 in 2019 to 24 this year. And so clearly we're looking at a very different type of violence that we're seeing out there, proliferation of guns combined with young people who are not involved in things that they traditionally would be involved with, and something that we're seeing around the country. And so I'll continue to work with the chief to figure out how we can do a better job of keeping young people out of harm's way, but also making sure that they don't have access to weapons to create the violence and, creating this string of victims in neighborhoods. So I think we're looking at a variety of different things. What we shared today are things in addition to elements of the comprehensive neighborhood safety strategy to deal with this issue that we outlined.
Mayor Ginther, a lot of these shootings have been shootouts, have been described as shootouts, and we've seen a lot of innocent people been hit. One was killed recently. You talked about having the community coming together. A lot of people are afraid to speak out. How is this going to change anything if there's a segment of the population who are fearful to speak out?
Well, we have to continue to build that trust, build that relationship. As the chief outlined, there are a number of ways folks can share information anonymously so that we can bring folks to justice and get them off the street. As he outlined, there's a very small number of folks that are creating a disproportionate amount of mayhem and violence. At the same time, we continue to urge, and I know we're fortunate to have a state senator and a congresswoman who believe that we ought to do more to keep illegal crime guns off our streets and continue to encourage the state legislature and leaders in Washington to take action. It's this dangerous combination of young people who don't have the resources and the experiences that they traditionally do, combined with proliferation of guns during the midst of a global pandemic, which has led to an economic crisis. We can't just pick and choose. We have to go after it comprehensively. And we think there are a lot of things, common sense, bipartisan, overwhelmingly, that the community supports to restrict and slow down this proliferation of guns.
You talk about this wraparound services you want to provide to our most vulnerable youth. We have heard anecdotally that a lot of these youth that are involved in the violence have run the adults in their lives off. They have run them out of the houses. They are taking over areas of these neighborhoods. How are you going to have wraparound services if the families are scared to come home with their children?
Well, that's something that obviously we're going to continue to work with the courts on. I'm going to let Commissioner Boyce talk a little bit more about these wraparound services. The county is kind of our expert service provider and partner as part of this comprehensive effort. But the chief, and as President Watson mentioned just even on Friday, working with the courts to figure out some other options. I know there are conversations that are taking place with other partners in the community, children's services and others that are involved in this space to figure out other alternatives as opposed to simply incarceration, but needing more than just simply ankle monitoring to deal with this issue. But Commissioner Boyce, you want to talk a little bit more about family stabilization?
Thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate the question. Let me begin by saying, there is no simple answer to, there's no magic wand where we can, wave it and these challenges go away. Many of the issues that people are facing in the community are a multitude of many things. But what we're doing with the stabilization unit is really trying to get at the problem before it's a problem. And so yes, there is the here and now, but there's also the future. There's also all of the challenges that sometimes families face that exacerbate other issues. So for example, let's say a family ends up in the juvenile detention system and it's a young person, let's say that young person is 14, and maybe it's truancy of why they're there. The Family Stabilization Unit is there to begin to find out what the issues are at that stage so that we can address that. We found that sometimes it can be a multitude of things, and I'm just making this up, but sometimes it's maybe mom's working 2 or 3 jobs, dad's incarcerated, and there are 4 siblings, and that person is responsible for getting the other kids to school because mom is off trying to get to 2 jobs and whatnot. And so, yes, that person is truant, or yes, that person is too tired to go to school. And so the idea is that we go in and try to really find out ways to alleviate some of that stress and to provide each person in that family with the resource they need to be successful. Maybe it's helping to find the mom a job that doesn't require her to have 2 jobs. Maybe it's a way to find, maybe it's a transportation issue. And so again, the idea is preventative, to try to address these issues early in the family's life cycle to prevent the more serious things from happening. As for those who are in a more serious situation, we're also trying to find ways to address, I mean, this kind of goes back to the poverty conversation that we've been having for the last 2 years. And that's, you know, our belief at Franklin County is the best social service is a good paying job. If we can create an environment for the family to be successful, to have the resources they need to overcome the challenges in environment, then we can begin to peel away at some of these other challenges that tend to exacerbate the environment and scenario. And so I love the idea that the mayor has of using folks who are linked into the community, whether it's with gang members or other, you know, groups of people in the community. I think oftentimes what we find in our court system is a disconnect, you know, the ability to communicate. And, you know, we term it as cultural competency today, but often it's really just having a person that can translate information into how it should be communicated to a family or in a different cultural way. And so I really think that's going to be a key element of success in some of these new models that we're rolling out.
Let's see if the chief has anything to add. The only thing I would add, Beth, on the top of that is the micro-intervention teams that we talked about. So they will be positive alternatives for course correction, but there'll also be consequences. And so having these young people, particularly that have committed multiple acts of violence, that if they don't accept these resources and this intervention, consequences will be coming their way. Because the bottom line is we have to disrupt and interrupt this tit-for-tat cycle of violence that's taking place amongst young people right now, and it takes everybody to be involved with that. Chief, any additional comments on that? Yes.
To follow up on that, have you reached out to the juvenile court system, or Chief, have you reached out to the juvenile court system? Because a lot of these very violent teens, not the teens who are delinquent, but the teens who have guns and who are shooting each other, have multiple warrants out for their arrest for several other dangerous crimes. Have you guys reached out to the court system to see if what can be done about those teens who have the mentality, well, there aren't going to be consequences for me because I'm a juvenile?
And that's part of what we've shared today is our response to that, because it's certainly an issue right now, and we're working with the courts, as I mentioned in my comments earlier, trying to look for other alternatives as well. I know the chief has been meeting and talking with the courts. I know President Watson coordinated and facilitated a meeting just on Friday with the courts and law enforcement. I'm not sure if either one of you want to add any additional comments.
Thank you. Again, as I said, President Watson had fortunate enough to convene this meeting and have us there to all be in the same room to talk over some of these issues. Like I said in my presentation, I support diversion programs. I support summons and lieu of arrest. There's a lot of programs I support for nonviolent offenders to try to find other paths and use some of these other services that the courts and the community can provide. But what's the acceptable response when someone's engaged in gun violence? It's not to continue to have someone out in the community where they can continue to commit those crimes. The mayor was very clear. At some point, there has to be a consequence for some activity. We are calling on the courts to partner with us, and that was part of the conversation the other day, is how can we find a way to have more of a consequence than just electronic monitoring that's not resolving the problem. And we want to find actual ways to look at people, places, and behaviors, and those are where we're focused on.
President Watson, any?
No.
Any other questions?
I have another one.
Sean?
Just in regards to this, the resources provided to families, they start to see the rise in violence. Is there a way that you all are looking at a long-term plan where these resources and the intentionality of continue to push these resources will continue in these neighborhoods, because they're seeing the up and downs whenever violence go down, the resources are there, but nobody's kind of pushing it out there.
It's a great question, a fair question, because I think that plays out when you look at this community's history. And that's why I think we're so fortunate right now with Rise Together, the county's poverty blueprint, our equity agenda that we put out, really focusing on parts of the community that have been left out and left behind. With our success story as a community being very purposeful and intentional, looking through that equity lens as we invest in places like Linden, the Hilltop, the South Side, our neighbors that are facing a disproportionate amount of the violence we're talking about here today and lack of opportunity. So I think you're going to see the county and the city, based on the vision and agenda, to continue to invest in and lift up our neighbors and neighborhoods that have been left out. And that's not just going to be today. And fortunately, we have a great advocate in Washington in Congresswoman Beatty, who understands that we can't reach our full potential as a community until everybody is sharing in that success. I think that's very different than where we've been as a community in the past, with that alignment and that commitment and engagement, quite honestly, from both the private sector and the nonprofit sector, that understand we have to, if we're going to be purposeful and intentional about equity, that means we have to go about this work differently and understand that it's going to take a significant period of time and concerted, dedicated resources over time to see the impact we want to see. Please.
Let me just add, from the county standpoint, it's really why we're grateful for the COVID-19 CARES Act dollars, and it has been amazingly helpful in allowing us to address some of the response issues from the coronavirus. We're using general fund dollars because we know that this is a commitment that goes far beyond the current environment. The current environment is exacerbating all of the issues that we knew were there. We did our Rise Together study in 2018. And so from us, that's the purposeful declaration of general fund dollars so that we can be committed for the long haul. For me? Okay.
What is the scope of this work going to be, and how are you going to select the families? I know you had mentioned truancy is one of those key things that you're looking for, but how do you pick out those families, and how do you make sure they follow through in the programs? So
we've hired 2 young men that are zeroed in, where their offices are right there, and they can be referred from the judge or the prosecutor. They can be referred from another agency. So you heard child enforcement, you heard Office of Aging. There are a number of ways they can end up in the Family Stabilization Unit, because most importantly, while we're focused on the young boys, we're looking at the entire family. So if grandma is the person who is leading the family and heading the household, but there are challenges that grandmother needs, then we're going to look for the resources to provide. So there's really, we can take them into our system in a number of ways, really. It's really endless. And so now from a practitioner standpoint, I wish that someone from JFS was here, because there are triggers that identify where there is a more immediate need over here than over here. And so we find ways to get to this person in a more immediate fashion than perhaps this. But those are things that the practitioners and the clinicians, I think, are more adept at identifying.
How many families are you hoping to help?
I put a number on it at all. You know, I gotta tell you, whenever we get to talking about we want to help X amount of families, I get to be skeptical, because the approach is we want to help every family that comes to our doors. Now, I know that's not practical all the time. However, our approach should be that kind of focus. And so I would never hope that our staff would come and say, here's the target for the year, here's the number. It's all families. We want to provide them with the resources that already exist by triaging them in the right way.
So families who are not referred, are they still eligible to contact you and say there's a mom out there who's like, my son's going on the wrong track, what do? I need help. Can they still be eligible for this program?
Of course, that's the best way to get to us, quite frankly, before the alarm is ringing, and so we certainly want to get to families before. But as you've talked about in many of your questions, we're trying to really zero in on where the water is spilling out of the boat. And so we're getting to that. But at the same time, we're thinking about the safe shores and thinking about where there are other places that we can focus our attention to so that we can be ahead of the prevention efforts. And so absolutely, we would accept them. And a lot of times, by the way, because this program is housed in Jobs and Family Services, it's the place or the system where we're already getting families that have need. It might be food, it might be rent subsidies, it might be transportation, it might be clothes. And so we can already, again, identify triggers that allow us to apply more resources to that family so that their long-term possibilities of success are stronger.
This is the time of year where we would typically have kids getting ready to go back into the school buildings. That's obviously not happening this fall with Columbus City Schools. I don't know if Doc West, if you could talk about what you and your staff are trying to do to reach these kids, since you're not going to be seeing them face to face, to try and build that connection and that trust. So a lot of times teachers are the first people to hear about things and can see things developing before it gets to a point where it's spilling into the streets.
And thank you for that. A lot of times as we're talking in schools, we're first off building relationships. When you're building those relationships, students are talking, just keeping those dialogues open. Now you're talking to moms, aunts, uncles. So really with that, our hand down from the district is we're going to be virtual. Of course, it's going to be a virtual school year, but already just putting those pieces in place on what does outreach look like from the school, especially because a lot of our students weren't connected in. So we're really going to, take staff's input on it as well. I know I have my ideas of wanting to, go out to families and do certain kind of outreach, but I also want to get input from the staff as well because I want buy-in from everyone. But it's mainly, building relationships so you can have that two-way communication. Okay.
To your question, I think that it's one of the reasons we, in partnership with the county, invested in the additional Chromebooks and access to Wi-Fi for students because particularly in Columbus City schools, there were tens of thousands of students without Chromebook and access to Wi-Fi. To make that virtual education more real and have that being more engaging. And in partnership with the county, we've expanded our summer camps through the end of August. Generally, they end the end of July because school's starting about this time of year. And we're taking a look at what types of after-school or outside of school activities could take place at rec centers and in parks throughout the city this fall to make sure that young people doing it in a healthy and safe way have access to that engagement and appropriate constructive activities for them to participate in. Obviously today we've been focused on folks that are beyond that, some of the prevention work that Commissioner Boyce talked about, but really focusing on these young people that have had multiple violent interactions and committed serious crimes in our community. Those aren't the folks probably coming to summer camps or those types of things. And so it takes a very different approach. We want to work on the prevention, but we also need to be very focused on this issue that's a direct threat to people in Columbus and young people. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to say publicly today, once officially announced that Primary One Health in the Charlotte bars, and I'm the coordinator of outreach for Primary One Health. We want to offer our services in the dissemination of information. We are frontline people, community health workers, and anything we can do to further this cause of nonviolence. We did it in 2003 under Mayor Coleman, and we're not stopping now. So we are frontline. Let us know, keep us in the conversation, and we will go out into the community to support in any way we can.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we got time for one more question, Lacey?
A question about ShotSpotter. CPD's been pushing for its expansion for about a year now. Was it because of that push or because of the spike in violence, and where's the money coming from to fund the expansion, and what's the timeline for all that?
I'll let Chief Quinlan talk to a couple of those things. I think what we wanted to see is how the data played out. We saw some, this is something Deputy Chief Bash has been kind of managing, leading for the chief and the division. We saw some great initial results, great response from the community about this. And because as you know, generally I think it's like 80% of gunfire around the country goes unreported. And so it does two terrible things. The police are not able to respond because they don't know what's taken place because it isn't reported. And then the people of that community and neighborhood feel like the police don't care because they didn't respond and come out to make sure they were safe. So we've received some great results in the pilot that we started in Hilltop, South Side, Linden, wanted to expand it to the Erie side. And so I'll let Chief Quinlan talk a little bit about those results, but we wanted to wait about a year to make sure we had enough data and evidence to suggest that it had been successful and it was time for expansion. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor. Commander Smith-Weir will come up. I'll give you a brief update, and I'll let him speak to anything else that he wants to from the patrol response specifically, since he's overseeing all that. So the other night I rode, just last week, I rode with Officer Mel Romans in Linden area, and it was very, very helpful for me to actually be in the car. We were driving down a street, and we actually heard the gunshots go off, and within 30 seconds, the report popped up on our computer right there and shows exactly where the gunfire was and the radius and everything. So it was very quick, very specific information, actionable information. So the technology that we can use there is vital to police being able to have an impact. I'll let Commander Weir mention this, but we have had several cases, examples where we have actually intervened in a shooting where someone was found with a gunshot wound before it was ever reported by anyone else. Minutes saved lives in those cases. So there have been many lives saved from that technology, as well as other, in addition to the other forensic uses and stuff that we can benefit from that program. Commander Weir, you want to mention a few other of the success stories with ShotSpotter, please?
Thank you. In terms of ShotSpotter, we've had numerous instances where, because of the alert that was posted to the officers, our officers have been able to respond. The other night, we found a victim in a car that was slumped over unconscious. Nobody had called it in. That person was able to receive medical attention and lived, in large part because we were able to respond so quickly. So we do see the value in it. We have officers that are responding day and night to these alerts, in addition to the calls for service. And then the next day we have officers following up, and that we get an investigative benefit from well as that. So once they follow up, we look for shell casings and other evidence that we maybe not be able to find during the night. And then we also try to do knock door-to-doors, where we talk to people, talk to neighbors, say, heard there were shots fired last night. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? Is anything going on in the neighborhood? And we've gotten value out of that as well. And I guess the untallied benefit of that is that in addition to any kind of investigative information we receive, the neighborhood knows that we're out there and we care about the gun violence and we're following up on it. And you can't put a number on that. And that's very important. So that's the big thing. Now, in terms of your question, we are looking to expand ShotSpotter to the Erie side. We do want to expand the areas that we currently have as well. We have applied, I think the Department of Public Safety has applied for a couple grants in terms of funding, but I don't have the exact number or the status on what, where those grants are in the process. So that's what we're looking at with that.
Do you know what the timeline is for that?
I do not, sorry.
When you hear back, when you'll get the grants, or when is the decision going to be made?
I would hope in the next couple of months, but like I said, I would think before the budgets for the fiscal year are set that we would have that kind of information.
I think regardless of our success in the grants, this is happening.
Okay.
We're hopeful for grants, but if those don't come through, this is something we're committed to and sure happens. We'll stick around for one-on-one questions if everybody can stick around for just a few minutes. Thanks, everybody.